We're going to have a conversation about where the consumer fits in all of this. We haven't really talked much about the role of the consumer. And to head up that conversation, please welcome a good friend of ours, a contributing editor, editor-at-large at GreenBiz, and the executive director of the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience, Amy Christensen.
Thank you. Thanks, Joel. Well, I'm very happy to be here, and joining me today is Eric Gleason, who's the president of NextEra Energy Hawaii. And Eric, come up and join me on the stage. We have an important conversation from a guy with a long history in the utility industry. Before he joined NextEra, he was a VP of Corporate Development at Allegheny Energy, and before that, an investment banker at JP Morgan and Goldman, working with European and North American utilities. So you definitely know our space, this challenge before us here by 2045 to get to 100% renewable energy. So something we haven't really talked about much so far is the consumer. Where is the consumer in all this, in this conversation?
Well, my sense is that they're in a little different space from where most of the people are in this room, and actually I'd kind of like to test that hypothesis, and so I'm going to ask for a little audience participation. Let me make sure I got the question right here. Okay.
We didn't discuss this.
We didn't discuss. I'm audibling. So here's a question I'm going to ask, and then I'll give you 3 answers, and please raise your hand. Realistically, what are Hawaii's chances of achieving its 100% renewable energy goal by 2045? And the choices, don't raise your hand yet, I'll just run through the choices. A, great, achievable. B, about 50-50. Or C, very doubtful, no way. Okay, and there's Mark Glick right there. I think I know your answer. So Hawaii's chances of achieving its 100% by 2045 goal. So please put your hand up if you think the answer is A, great, achievable. Okay, Mark, very good to see that. All right. B, about 50-50. Okay. And C, very doubtful, no way. I'm looking for a hand. I think I see one back there.
2.
Some people didn't vote because, well, for whatever reason, that's fine. So clearly, you know, I'd say the majority of the people who voted said great, achievable. A significant minority said about 50-50, and I think there was one person who's a bit of a skeptic and said it's very doubtful and no way. So for some of you may recognize that what I just read was an online survey from the Star Advertiser about 3 months ago. And, you know, of course, it's not a scientific poll, it's an online survey. But they had 872 respondents, and about 16% agreed with the majority of the people in this room and thought, you know, great, achievable. About 27% were 50-50, and about 57% said it's very doubtful and no way. And so that's a data point that to me says that, you know, outside of this room, for a lot of the people in the state, there's a lot of skepticism about the viability of the 100% renewable energy goal. And let me just say, by the way, I'm a big believer in it, so I'm not, please don't shoot the messenger. I'm not trying to, you know, be a downer. I will also just add that in the 18 months or so that I've been very fortunate to be living here and going around the state, and I've met with almost 7,000 people now and had a lot of conversations about energy. And my sense is that it kind of corroborates that online poll that, you know, there is a lot of skepticism about whether, you know, the track that we're on is actually achievable or desirable.
Why does that matter?
So I think it matters because we live in a democracy. And, you know, Henry Curtis, who's sitting right here, and, you know, I'm sure like many of you, I read his blog, and he talks a lot about the importance of not just being top-down planners and you know, I think soliciting the input of the community. That's how I interpret it. And I agree with that. And, but fundamentally, you know, if we get too out of step with where the consumers are, where the voters are, this transformation, in my view, won't be sustainable, or certainly at a minimum you can say it's at risk, because at the end of the day, the consumers, the voters are gonna decide whether we continue down this path. And so I think it's really important that we find a way to get in step with the consumer.
So what are you all doing at NextEra? What are the other utilities doing to engage them, to educate them, to have this conversation about this 100% goal, how realistic it is, what's the roadmap, what are folks doing, and how is it not reaching those consumers?
Yeah, so I'd say, this part's really hard. I mean, probably I've spent more of my time talking with people around the state on these sorts of issues than anything else over the last 18 months. And, in that time, I've got to about 0.5% of the population of Hawaii. And on my current, rate, that would take about 300 years to get to everybody. And so clearly that's not the way forward, right? And probably there's a lot of you who think you could do a better job of that than I could anyway, and I'm not going to argue that. So we've got to find a better way to engage with people. I think energy is a really complicated area. Any conversation I have, there's an element of just kind of getting a common basis of facts. I'm sure many of you find that. I think there's real skepticism. There is a lack of trust by consumers, by people in the community generally. Some of that's directed towards the utility. We all know that, but it's broader than that. It's towards government. It's even towards the PUC. And I think we need to get past that. And develop some trust. I think what the Maui Economic Development Board did a couple of years ago with their Empower Maui study was a very systematic way of getting out in the community, conveying some basic information, getting people's input. I think that's something like that is important, but at the same time we need to show that we're listening and that ultimately that consumers are part of this, of deciding the path forward and hopefully as part of that, they start to recognize not only is it possible, but this is a good thing.
VERGE does a great job bringing together the innovators. People are really pioneering, working towards things like 100% renewable energy for communities, cities, states. What about case studies of other places who are already getting there, right? California, Scotland, Portugal, you hear about where those numbers are for renewable energy generation, the projects that you all have developed all over the United States, selling into the grid, cost competitively. So what about sharing? Do people just don't believe that's doable here in Hawaii? It's just, is there a different context?
Well, just speaking for myself, I mean, from what I know of, other jurisdictions around the world, I think there is a panel in a couple of days on this basic topic. But my belief is, from what I know, that there's no place that has gone beyond where Hawaii is today in a lot of ways that really matter. I mean, there are places you can cite that have more renewable energy, but they don't have the technical challenges that Hawaii is going to have to get to 100% locally produced renewable energy. So I don't think we can tell consumers, tell the community, hey, there's a great example over there. We actually know what's happening here is Hawaii is leading in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But one thing I want to add, one thing I've heard loud and clear, and the Empower Maui study also made very clear, is that the number one issue for the people out there is costs. So they're very pro getting off of oil. They want to get off of oil. Most people are pro renewable energy. But the most important thing to most customers is the cost of their electricity. And I think if we had more customers, people who weren't what I'll call the group in here, sort of the energy stakeholders, if we had more customers in the room today, I think they'd be a little surprised by what they were hearing, because if you did a word search over the last 3 hours, before just now, I heard cost twice. Alan Oshima mentioned cost twice. So we're talking a lot about technology. We're talking a lot about changing the paradigm, business models, big goals. Very exciting stuff. It's all important. But I think if we lose sight of costs and we do this in a way that is without regard to costs, then my suspicion is, based on what I've heard is important to customers, that there's going to be a backlash.
Well, speaking of customers, why don't I turn it over to Lauren and just see if we have a couple questions coming in from folks outside, online, and from the community.
We have a couple questions about overcoming cultural barriers potentially, specifically around potential skepticism and the need for transparency. So how would you summarize your efforts in that realm?
Well, I mean, we like I said, I've spent 18 months talking to people. We've been through a process which I think we're very close to the end of a PUC review. Our primary involvement here in NextEra Energy in Hawaii has been through the merger review process with Hawaiian Electric. And there's obviously been a lot of information shared in that. That's sort of how we approach things. I think more broadly, Hawaiian Electric, regulated business, any major decision they make is subject to a lot of scrutiny by the PUC and other stakeholders. But I think all that's great, but the bigger issue, I guess, I'm underscoring here is that most consumers don't know anything about or don't understand that process. A lot of them don't even understand that there's a PUC and what their role is. So I think we've got a real challenge in terms of to be viewed as transparent, to help people understand, to give them input. I think we've got a real fundamental challenge, first and foremost, of engagement.
What's the role of mayors? I mean, you've got mayors, you have city council folks, county commissioners, et cetera. What's their role in helping to further this conversation? So we saw the governor's leadership, mayor from Kauai earlier, engaging in this. To what extent are they engaged? To what extent are they reaching out to their communities to talk about the importance of this and what it means for those communities, really from cost issues as well as job creation, stability, independence of the economy? Do you see them engaging?
Yes, in different degrees in different ways, according to their approaches and priorities. And I would just say generally, I'm not here to say this is how we need to do it. Okay, my message to you all today is I think we have an issue. I think there's a disconnect between the people in this room and what our priorities are and where we think we are and where a lot of people out there are. And that's a potential risk to where I think virtually everyone in this room, and I certainly include myself in this, wants to get to, which is 100% renewable energy by 2045, if not sooner. So I certainly don't propose to have a monopoly on the solutions and what we need to do, and I welcome people's input.
Lauren, did you have anything else?
Yeah, the other question sort of to that end was how, as a public company, sort of how aggressive can you be in this realm, especially given the examples of some turbulence in companies like NRG?
Well, I mean, as a public company, we can be incredibly aggressive in this realm, but as a public utility, we have to think about customers. So being a public company is not, if I'm understanding the question, is not any sort of impediment in terms of moving forward with renewable energy. But when you're in the public utility business, you have to think about the impact on all customers, not just a few customers. NRG's situation was different. They've run into some financial challenges, as have others. So not all companies are in the same financial position.
So I'm curious if any of the folks who are online or who are sending some questions have ideas. I mean, how can we engage people and get them,
That's a great question.
To be part of this conversation about energy? So those of us who are in energy, I think, find it fascinating and enthralling, and yet so many people, it's a bit of a tough one to deal with, to really understand the complexities of the regulatory framework as well as the technologies. I'm just curious, would love some ideas and encourage those to come over. But do you guys have any more questions?
We did get one comment that said, can you increase your marketing budget? But more seriously, we are getting questions about sort of how you think about public education and all of this. Like, is that your role, or who
Yeah,
does
I think
that?
in part, it's the utilities' role. I mean, I think it's going to, my perspective for what it's worth is that while the utilities have certainly very close ties within the communities, play an important role in the community, spend effort and money on consumer education. I think that the importance of that is increasing because we're going through this massive change that people fundamentally don't understand and aren't bought into. And we need to make sure we're all aligned, or it puts everything at risk. So I think it's only becoming more important, and that will in fact also, I presume, mean money.
One last one?
Yeah, the last one we had was just if there are lessons that you're learning in Hawaii that you think will be transferable to other markets in the mainland or elsewhere.
Well, there's no question that Hawaii, because of how far it is in terms of renewable energy penetration, distributed energy penetration, and an island grid environment which magnifies the impact of these technologies on actually managing a stable grid. There's no question that there are lessons to be learned in Hawaii, and that will continue and only grow over time.
I think I'll wrap with a quick fun fact.
Oh, gosh.
Well, please join me. Well, I want to thank you for this conversation, because I think it's an important one that a lot of us, I think, need to work together on to engage the consumer to be part of this. But also, I think we should all wish you some luck, as Eric has just turned 50 and is learning to surf, and it's not going well. So let's support him in that.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.